I am Jenny Shaneyfelt, and I have a master's degree in education. I am also a realtor. I am a broker, and I own my own real estate company, and I teach real estate classes, pre-licensed classes and brokers classes. I can teach CE classes as well, continuing education. So I wanted to start doing some videos for my students, and I hope you benefit from them as well, for whatever reason you're watching. So I was going to go through A to Z in vocabulary for real estate. And so if you wanted to find a different vocabulary list, you can go to find the one that starts with the letter of the word that you're looking for. And maybe I'll have that in there for you. So I'm going to start with what a adjustable rate mortgage is. Most people call it an ARM, and ARM, all caps. And it's a mortgage loan with an interest rate that changes over time. So kind of like, I know my children always have to have the adjustable waist band in their pants that they buy because they're always a little bit thinner than the average kid. So I have to like squeeze their waist in, but they're always longer. So that's kind of the way the adjustable rate mortgage is. Over time, it can change. Usually at 3 years, the rate will change and then it'll adjust again after 4 years. A lot of times these mortgages have a balloon at some point where it all of a sudden you owe this big amount, and so you really need to read the fine print if you're looking at an adjustable rate mortgage. But if you're only going to own it for a few years, then it really actually makes a lot of sense. An agent, let's go to agent. An agent is a real estate professional that is legally licensed, usually within a specific state, to buy and sell property on behalf of their clients. An agent cannot operate independently. They must work under a licensed broker, which comes to what brokers is, and we'll define that later on. But an agent you can't have a national license for real estate. You have to have a real estate license for a specific state. You can co-brokerage with other agents, but usually they only work for a specific state. So you can get multiple licenses though for multiple states. But anyways, so an agent is a person who has gone through, in Alabama, it's a 60-hour course, and they have passed a test to become a real estate licensed agent. That is different than a realtor, what a realtor is, but we'll talk about that later. Amortization. Amortization is what they normally do with a 30-year or 15-year mortgage, and the process of gradually reducing a mortgage loan debt or your principal over time by establishing scheduled payments monthly. So the interest payment of an amortized loan will decrease over time, and the payments on the principal will increase. So it kind of like does this thing. The principal, you end up paying more towards the principal over time, but less towards the amount that you pay the loan, but the bank for allowing you to have that money. So also, the next one is assessed value. The value assigned to a real estate property that is used to determine its property tax rate. So a tax assessor usually comes through and they, take a group of homes in a specific area to determine the assessed value. A lot of times I've had people look up the taxes on the internet and see that the assessed value of the house is different than what they thought the house was worth. And really this amount has only thing to do with the taxes. So honestly, most of the time the house is worth less than it really is worth, because the tax assessor doesn't like to argue with people about how much taxes they owe. Now, if it's a new neighborhood, it's normally really close, but still it's usually a little bit less because it's always appreciating. And by the time, and they only do the assessment like ever so often. So by the time that they redo the assessment, it's the rest of the houses in the neighborhood have already appreciated a lot. So it's always a little bit less than what the house is worth. So I'll have a buyer come to me and say, oh my gosh, I looked at the assessed value on the internet and the house is not worth what we're paying for it. And that's just not the way it works. So don't stress out about that. The assessed value is usually less than what a house is really worth. So now let's go to B's. First, we will take broker, the word broker. So a broker is someone who has other people working underneath them. So whether we're talking about a mortgage broker or a real estate broker, they have people who are licensed underneath them working. So every single real estate agent who has a license must also work for a broker, a person who has a broker license and a brokerage, a company. So the broker is the person at the top, and then you have a lot of real estate agents working for that broker, or they're independent contractors, so they work for themselves, but the money has to go through the broker before it comes back to the real estate agent. And the broker has to not only pass the 60-hour course in Alabama, the 60-hour course for the pre-license exam, but they also have to take another 60-hour course for the broker's exam. And they have to pass both exams. All right, so the next one is buying agent or a selling agent. So I know like it gets really confusing sometimes because a buying agent and a selling agent seems like opposites, but they're actually the same thing. The person who sells the house, the person who brings the buyer is the selling agent, the person who sells the house. The listing agent is just the person who put the house up for sale, but the person who brought the buyer is the one who actually sold the house. Like, you go out and you buy a car, the person who sold you the car is the person who brought you to the closing table, right? The person who brings the person who's buying the house to the closing table is the buying agent or the selling agent. A real estate agent or broker that operates on behalf of a client buyer to help them find and purchase property. All right, so let's move on to C, capitalization rate or cap rate, and metric, and it's a metric used for real estate to evaluate the potential return on the investment property. So anyways, so the next word that we're going to talk about is closing. So the process of finalizing a real estate transaction, which is when the contract becomes a completed contract. So the closing is when the mortgage agreement is signed. It is also when you are paying for the house and when the seller signs his deed over to the buyer. And it also includes transaction fees. So there's several people that get paid at the closing table. There's usually the buying agent or the selling agent, the listing agent. They get paid at closing. Also the title company and the people who put together the title search, the title insurance, and all of the people who are involved with making sure that the title is clear of any encumbrances or clouds or things that would prevent a new owner from having a clear title. But also at the closing table, if you get a mortgage, you also pay the loan officer and all of the people involved with creating your loan. And a lot of times it's called different things with different lenders. And so most of the time it's called the loan origination fee. That's the person who brings you or the buyer to the person who prepares the pre-approval letter, pre-qualification letter. That's the loan originator, the person who brought the buyer to the lender. And then there's also the other people involved with the loan that also get paid at the closing table. Also at the closing table, you have things that are prepaids that you pay. So the insurance company and the tax assessor, the lender pays when they pay your mortgage, they also pay your taxes, your property tax, and your insurance. Because, if you default on insurance or property tax, then you have to foreclose on the house, and the lender doesn't want that to happen. So the lender wants to be completely involved in all areas of the possibility of the house being repossessed. So they pay your taxes and they also pay your insurance. So at the end of the year, you're going to get a bill for your taxes, but you don't pay that because the mortgage company pays it. But in order to be able to pay it, they have to have money to be able to send out that check at the end of the year. So when you close at the closing table, they take a whole year's worth of previous years of what they call prepaids to put into your escrow account. And this escrow account is where they hold your money, and they hold it for every single month. You put more and more money in there. And at the end of the year, they take all the money out of that escrow account and they send it out to the insurance, the homeowner's insurance, and they send it out to the tax office, the property tax office, to pay for your taxes and insurance. So that's another thing that you have to pay at closing. The other things are, let's talk about comparables. Comparables or what some realtors call comps. And comps is short for comparables. It is a term that refers to the prices of recently sold, like property that's in the area. So we have a house, and in order to figure out what that house is worth, we look at other houses in the neighborhood that are very similar to the house that you're looking at, the subject property. And those comparables help you figure out what that property might be worth. Should we put it up for sale? I say might loosely, because when you do a CMA, or a comparative market analysis, that is comparing other houses to this one, and not every house is exactly the same. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a little secret. If a person has really, really beautiful, expensive furniture, or if the furniture looks expensive, it actually adds value to a house. Now, I can't ever tell someone that, because, you walk into a house and they have ugly furniture, and you can't be like, well, I'm sorry, your house is worth less because, you have ugly furniture. But if they have dogs and stuff, and the dogs have been all over the furniture, and it's got ripped holes in it or something, it's going to devalue the house when people walk through it. I mean, it's just like a human thing. Like, we can't even help it. We see, torn up stuff in the house, and we think the whole house is a wreck, and we're just not going to want to make a offer on it. So, like, when you're making comparables, when you're creating comparables for houses, you got to take stuff like that into consideration. So, and there are also things that in comparables that are important to look for, like garages. Like, you can't take a 3-car garage house or a 4-car garage house and use that as a comparable for a house that doesn't have a garage. Like, it just doesn't. And if you really don't have anything else to compare it to, then you add what it would cost to put on a garage in order to, or to take off a garage, depending on which one's the subject property. So, but anyways, a comparable is a term that refers to the prices of recently sold properties that are used to determine the market value of other similar properties. A seller will refer to these comps when trying to figure out what their property is worth. So, and that goes into what a comparative market analysis is too. So usually a realtor, when coming to a listing, will do a comparative market analysis to determine what they think the house is worth. And this is a broad range. Like, sometimes I give people a number and then I show up and I completely change the number, because when I got there, I realized there were other things that I didn't realize that you can't realize unless you go there. Like, cracked tile, or the countertops are scratched up from mica, or, the oven is from 1957, a pink oven from 1957. So, I mean, things like that, you just don't know until you show up. So you can give them a number, but then you probably need to see the house before you change that. So contingency, a lot of real estate agents even get this word mixed up. So in the MLS, which means multiple listing service, you have a word called contingencies. So a lot of times a house will go active and it's for sale, and then all of a sudden it'll go contingent. What does that word mean? It means that we have accepted an offer that is contingent upon certain things. So contingent on, let's say, okay, well, we will accept this offer if we do an inspection and determine that there aren't things that we want to fix. Or we will accept this offer only if we get an approval from a lender company, an official approval from a lender company that we can afford the property. So those are what contingencies are. So a house will be for sale, for sale, for sale, and then all of a sudden it'll go contingent because there are still contingencies in the contract that have not been satisfied. Now, once each one of those contingencies are satisfied, we go through the inspection process and everybody agrees on what needs to be fixed and everybody agrees it needs to be fixed. And then we go through the approval process and everyone gets approved for the loan. And then those two contingencies are satisfied. Then the house will go from contingent to pending. And in pending status, it means that there's nothing left that would prevent this house from selling, except for the buyer just decided they didn't want it anymore and forfeits their earnest money. So that's what contingency means, a condition that must be met in order for a real estate contract to be finalized. So then there's a contract. A contract is when two people, at least a bilateral contract means there's two people that have something to do in order to come to an agreement. A written and legally, it has to be written and legally binding agreement between a buyer and a seller outlining the details of a real estate transaction. So this is what the buyer's going to do. They're going to get approved by a lender and make sure they have enough money to do it. And then this is what the seller's going to do. The seller is going to make sure that the house remains in good working condition, and they're going to make sure that they're going to make sure that all the inspection contingencies are satisfied according to what the buyer's requests are. And they're going to show up at the closing table with the keys. So each side has their own agreement to what they agree to until they come to an agreement. And everyone, in order for it to be a contract, it has to be signed by everyone, including the real estate agent. So it is an offer before it has signatures. So the buyer has signed it and then they offer to the seller. And then once the seller signs it, still not a contract yet until they've sent notice back to the buyer that they've accepted the offer, and the listing agent binds it when she does that. Curb appeal. This is a word that a lot of people don't really know how important it is. So when you have a listing, a curb appeal is so vital. I mean, you can have curb appeal and then the inside of the house be absolutely disgusting, and you'll still likely get an offer if it's priced correctly. So curb appeal is really important. So that's all A, B, and C. Okay, so let's move on to D, debt to income ratio. It's a percentage that lenders use that helps them calculate the risk associated with giving out loans to buyers. So it's the total amount of your monthly debt payments divided by the monthly gross income. So this ratio, a lot of times the lender will talk to you about, and if it's too high, sometimes you can get away with like paying some debt off in order to make it the ratio better to get qualified. But anyways, DTI, debt to income ratio. Then there's dual agency, and dual agency is, so in America, we have the real estate is where we divide the procedure or the service of a real estate agent. So we divide it up between a listing agent and a buyer's or selling agent. And this is called, when both of the people are the same person or the same company, that's called dual agency. So you know the word dual means two. So like when the listing agent and the buyers or selling agent are the same person or the same company, it's called dual agency, because technically the broker who is over the company is the listing agent and the selling agent for all the real estate that happens within this company. So even if it's the same company that's listing and the same company that's selling, but it's two different agents, but at the same company, it's still a dual agency. So a dual agency, again, is a situation where the real estate agent or broker represents the buyer and the seller at the same time. They represent both people. So in other countries, it's not like that. Only one person does each transaction, but it's interesting how different places do it differently. Now there is also down payment. So a down payment, earnest money, down payment, they sometimes get confused, but a down payment is something that you put as a payment towards your loan, where a deposit or an earnest money check is something that you use to secure the contract. It's basically putting your money where your mouth is. So you put down a deposit on the house to secure the contract. A down payment is what you put on a mortgage. So a down payment is the amount of money that a buyer must pay up front as part of a real estate transaction. It is usually expressed as a small percentage of the overall price of the property. Sometimes they say it's usually 1%. Most mortgage lenders will require a down payment as collateral. So earnest money, which, like I said, is a cash deposit paid by the buyer. A lot of people call this a deposit too. So, but an earnest money is just what it says. It means you're in earnest, that you're honest about your offer for a house, that you're not going to walk away, that I'm putting this money down to secure the contract, to make sure that you know that my promise is legit, that I'm going to show up at closing. So it's a cash deposit paid by the buyer during a real estate contract to indicate that they are serious about purchasing the property. And yeah, again, sometimes it's called a deposit. Equity, E for equity. So equity is the difference between the principal balance of a loan and how much a property is worth. So you could even have equity in gold, or jewelry. So it's the difference between how much you owe on the property versus how much you could sell the property for. So that amount you can actually borrow against. So anything that you own outright, if you pay off the house, then the total amount of what the house is worth is the equity. And you could even take out another mortgage on that after you pay it off, so if you wanted to. So it's a measure calculated by taking the market value of a property and deducting the amount that is still owed on the mortgage. So some people will, after they even buy the property a couple of years later, they might refinance the home, and that's basically what they're doing. Is a lot of times, sometimes they refinance to get a better rate. Sometimes they finance to take out that equity and use it for remodeling or buying a car, maybe putting your kids through college. So escrow, E for escrow. So escrow is basically when you're holding money for someone else. So different people can have different escrow accounts for different reasons. A property management company sometimes holds escrow for the person who owns the property to use toward repairs on the home when something happens with the home. Now, in a real estate transaction on buying a property, the real estate agent might take money, your earnest money or deposit, and put it into an escrow account where they hold the money while it's actually cashed into the account. Because I have had some people in the past, like, they give me a check and they're like, oh my God, you deposited it. Well, yeah, I deposited it. It goes into the escrow account. So it goes into an escrow account where the money is held until the transaction has been completed. The contract has been completed and signed by all people and fulfilled. And so the escrow can also be held for a lender. So a lender holds an escrow account for you. Sometimes they will hold money in an account that is your money that you pay monthly into this escrow account. Your taxes, a prorated amount, like you total tax amount divided by 12, and they put it in your payment, and they put that money every month into this escrow account so that it accumulates and so that at the end of the year, the lender has enough money to pay the taxes and insurance for the property for you. So it's an arrangement in which a neutral third party, like the lender or the title company or the realtor, holds the funds associated with the transaction until a specific condition is met, and then they release the funds. Usually the earnest money or the deposit is used towards the purchaser's or buyer's closing costs. So exclusive right to sell agreement. So an exclusive right to sell means that you have, the real estate agent has the right, the exclusive right to receive a commission regardless of who actually brings the seller, or sorry, regardless of who brings the buyer. So it doesn't matter who brings the buyer. The real estate agent is the one who listed it, who put it in the MLS, is the procuring person to get the full commission. Now that real estate agent would share that commission more than likely with the buyer's agent or the purchaser's agent. So an exclusive right to sell, you have exclusive right to sell this home. It's a listing agreement where a property owner or seller must pay commission to a real estate agent no matter who finds the buyer. So if the owner finds a buyer, they must still pay the commission. And really, it's the only fair way for a real estate agent to make this agreement, because you spend all this money on putting the for sale sign in the yard and putting it in the MLS, and time is money, and advertisement and all these things to sell this property, and then the seller comes and brings a buyer, then you've wasted all this money. So you don't want to put out that effort to sell this property without knowing for sure that you're going to get paid back. So that's where it is. Most real estate agents are going to secure a contract that's called an exclusive right to sell. Exclusive right to sell. So exclusive agency agreement is a listing agreement between a property owner and a real estate agent, where commission is paid if the agent finds a buyer, but only if the agent finds a buyer. The owner is not responsible for paying commission if they find a buyer themselves. But see, this leads into the reason why this one's not something that I would do. I'm not telling you not to do it, but I wouldn't do it, and this is why. Because you are going to syndicate your listing through the MLS to all these different websites. And let's say that, someone sees it on that website and they come by the house and see the seller in the front yard. And they're like, hey man, I want to buy your house. And the seller's like, sure, let's buy your house. And then they're like, oh, I don't have to pay you commission. Although it was actually your syndication from the MLS that brought the buyer to the house to even meet the seller in the first place. But see, that can create an argument. And here is probably the number one most important rule in real estate for real estate agents, is if you can foresee an argument or a disagreement about something, it's not a good idea to do it. So if you can't make every single scenario clear that if this happens, this happens, if this happens, this happens, if this happens, this happens, and everyone is clear about all the parameters of what's going to happen, then that's a good transaction. But if we're not clear, we're not sure, the water's muddy, who brought the buyer? Was it your syndication through Zillow who brought the buyer, or was it the seller who brought the buyer? And do you see there's a disagreement there and about the true who brought the buyer? So whenever there's a possibility of a disagreement about something, it's not a good transaction to do. So I would say exclusive agency agreement is not one that I would do. Not telling you what to do, but it's not what I would do. So let's move on to F. So F through J. Foreclosure. So sometimes people may not pay their bills for their mortgage. And that would mean that the lender or mortgage company has the right to take back that property according to the liens that they've put on, recorded at the courthouse against the deed. So a foreclosure is a legal process that occurs when a property owner fails to uphold their mortgage agreement, all the payments, and the mortgage lender can claim the property and really resell it. This usually takes a little while to do, though. It's not like, okay, you missed 2 payments and oh, they've seized your property. So depending on what kind of foreclosure it is, it may have to go through litigation and through the courts to determine who has rights. So anyways, foreclosure though is when a person didn't make their payments and were unable to make their mortgage payments for usually an extended period of time. So then there's FHA loans, which is a mortgage loan that is backed and administered by the Federal Housing Administration, which is what FHA stands for. It's just a certain type of loan. And we have a primary mortgage market, and then we have a secondary mortgage market. And the primary people are the originators, the origination, like the people you meet, the people you talk to on the phone. Those are primary mortgage people. They will create your loan, satisfy your loan when you get to the closing. But normally their intent is to get this loan closed so that they can sell it to the secondary mortgage market. And in order to be able to sell it to the secondary mortgage market, they have to satisfy certain parameters for them to be able to buy it. Like the secondary mortgage market says, we'll only buy your loans if it has this, and this, A, B, C, and D, all have to have in order for us to want to buy your loans. So the primary mortgage market will always try to satisfy those A, B, C, and D so that they are able to sell it to the secondary. So they might call it an FHA loan, but that's the mortgage that they're trying to satisfy so that they can later on sell it. So then there's fixed rate mortgages. And a fixed rate mortgage is normally whatever majority, the most common general mortgage is. It's a home loan with an interest rate that stays the same throughout the loan's life. So an ARM, like I talked about in A's, might be a good idea if you're not going to own the house for more than 5 years. But a fixed rate is advantageous for people who are going to own the property for a long extended period of time. It's generally a little bit higher initially interest rate than an ARM would be, but eventually the ARM is going to blow up and become larger than the fixed rate would be. So it's usually a fixed rate is usually for 15 or 30 years, a 30-year mortgage that's amortized, which means that they break the loan payments down over 30 years. And the principal becomes that you end up over time, you pay a lot of interest at the beginning, but then over time, your principal, you start paying more principal and less interest. So that's usually what a fixed rate mortgage does. It's amortized over 30 years or 15 years and throughout the life of the loan. And honestly, it's pretty much the best deal. And the biggest reason for why it's important to even be a home buyer, because a home buyer is advantageous because you have a fixed payment. So over, let's say 10 years from now, your payment's still going to be the same, but as inflation rises, you're probably going to be making more money than you were when you bought the house. So the payment's not going to feel as heavy as it might because you're more than likely going to be making more money. So, however, if you're renting, 100% of your payment goes to the person who owns the apartment or the person who owns the home, which is 100% interest. And a mortgage loan payment does not ever appreciate with the property. Now your property taxes will. So as your property appraises or appreciates more and more, the taxes may go up more, but depending on where you are located, in Alabama, our property tax is not very high, so it doesn't change the payment that much. So, and then there's a home appraisal. So a lot of times before someone lists their house, they want to get a home appraisal. And this could be a very advantageous choice do have exact procedures that they have to go by in order to come up with a number, but really they, I mean, they can vary. Getting an appraisal can help you make sure that you're getting the right price for your home, but also another advantage to it is that you are also going to get specific amounts of, or specific numbers for the measurements for your home. So I know a real estate agent can do that, but the appraisers are actually trained and taught to do that in a very specific way. Then we have home inspections. A lot of people get home inspections and appraisals mixed up. Home inspections are not the same thing as an appraisal, although there might be repairs for each one of them. So a home inspection is like a general inspector comes and looks, depending on how good the inspector is, he may look at all of the electricity, all of the HVAC, all of the appliances in the home that remain, the oven, dishwashers. He'll just come in and make sure that everything in the house is actually in good working order. And if it's not, a home inspector will give you a report, and you can request for the seller to fix certain things. And, you know, given the negotiations, you might get some things fixed. But an appraiser is different because they will come in and they'll demand things be fixed. The things that the appraiser asks to be fixed are generally demanded. So in most cases, FHA loans and VA loans have appraisers who are going to inspect the property. A lot of times conventional loans, they don't generally have too many parameters for what house has to have or does not have to have in order for the loan to be funded. And the home inspector is always recommended, or should always be recommended, by your real estate agent, because it can help you determine if the house has some serious issues before buying, and then you can negotiate with the seller on whether or not they would like to fix those things prior to closing. And then the appraiser, you know, is also going to sometimes ask for things to be fixed. So depending on whether you're the listing agent or the selling agent, buyer's agent, it's whether or not you want to make sure that those things get fixed, or whether or not you even want to have a home inspection done prior to listing. So, but anyways, that is all that I have for today. So thanks for listening.